We see the word day zero rolling out across various media platforms in South Africa at the moment, and particularly acutely felt in some of the smaller towns. And central to the day zero drama is this whole discussion about desalination. Most of our cities or towns along the coast have severe water crises, and all of them are sitting right next to a massive water resource, the ocean. So let's quickly unpack this desalination thing just so that ordinary people can understand it. Let's compare raw water, in other words, water from a river, with water from the ocean. And then let's start homing in from international numbers to some South African numbers. And we can start building up a case around that. So if you look at international numbers that are provided by the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, they talk about surface water cost in South Africa is up to 4 Rand per cubic meter, 4 Rand per kiloliter. That's still not treated properly, but that is then ultimately sold on to the public, and the ballpark number there is about 40 Rand per cubic meter. That's the cost of water. Then you've got to treat it, process it, put it in pumps, pipe it, reticulate it, and it's eventually sold to the consumer at approximately plus minus 40 Rand per cubic meter. It could be 35, it could be over 42, but let's just say for argument's sake it's 40 Rand. So there's an increase there from 4 Rand per cubic meter to 40 Rand per cubic meter. That's what the current retail price of water is in most of your municipalities. And then if you take the same WWF report, they talk there about large-scale desalination comes in at 10 to 20 Rand per cubic meter. So let's just use that as a benchmark number. So we're saying that your raw water costs 4 Rand a cubic meter. It is sold on at 40 Rand a cubic meter, and desalination comes in at between 10 and 20 Rand a cubic meter. So let's just work around those numbers. Let's compare those numbers now to global standards. And the global standard is quite interesting because the global standard talks about the cost per cubic meter in terms of American dollars, US dollars. And half a US dollars or 50 US cents is currently the global cost of desalinated water if you look across all the hundreds of desalination plants globally. So let's take a benchmark number at 50 US cents per cubic meter under current technologies. And that 50 US cents per cubic meter comes in at a Rand value of 7 Rand 98, let's call it 8 Rand per cubic meter. So the global cost of desalination as in its present configuration comes in at 8 Rand a cubic meter. Remember, our raw water cost is 4 Rand to take it out of the river, and then it's sold onto the consumer at 40 Rand. So already there with the global cost of 50 US cents per cubic meter or 8 Rand a cubic meter, we are in the ballpark. But now it gets a lot more interesting because there are a number of technologies that are coming to the market that are changing the game in a fundamental way. We get a situation where in the Middle East we are seeing trends now towards 0.40 cents per 40 American cents per cubic meter, which comes down to 6 Rand 38. And in fact, in Saudi Arabia and that part of the Middle East, there are government policy initiatives currently underway to set the target for 30 US cents per cubic meter, which comes down to less than 5 Rand per cubic meter. So the designated target in the Saudi Arabian area for desalination is 30 US cents per cubic meter, which comes down to, let's call it 4 Rand 80 per cubic meter, which is very, very close to 4 Rand per cubic meter for bulk, raw, untreated water that from freshwater resources. So these are the benchmark numbers. Now we've got to start asking ourselves the question, what happens when that bulk raw water is no longer available? Then if you haven't got the water, then the 4 rand per cubic meter is no longer valid, because your cost starts going up for that water, because you've got to start competing against other uses of that water. So that's assuming that the water is available 4 rand a cubic meter for raw cost, sold on to the consumer at 40 rand per cubic meter, and the global average for desalination is coming down to 30 US cents per cubic meter, which is just below 5 rand per cubic meter. So we're in that ballpark. And just to say 2 more things that are happening in South Africa. The first is there was recently a trial done in Durban for the remix technology. And remix technology is very interesting technology, because what it does is it's taken water from wastewater, in other words, a sewage treatment plant, and that sewage treatment water normally gets discharged back into the environment, either into the ocean or into a river, where it will then flow naturally into some other water treatment plant and get converted back into drinking water. All of our drinking water in South Africa is essentially processed sewage water, although we don't refer to it as that, but that's what it actually is. So that water that is currently being discharged has to be discharged at a certain standard from a wastewater works. But if you take that treated wastewater discharge and you mix it with seawater, what you do is you reduce the amount of salt in the seawater. And by reducing the amount of salt in the seawater, you fundamentally alter the economics of desalination. And that starts driving the cost down to below 30 US cents per cubic meters, or 4.80 per cubic meter. So the desalination technology pioneered in Durban, called Remix, is a massive game changer in South Africa. But more importantly, there's another new technology that's also becoming globally mature now. And that technology is hydrogen-based economy. You're seeing more and more reference being made now to hydrogen economy. We see big mining trucks come to South Africa that are hydrogen-powered. We see hydrogen fuel cells now becoming very, very cost-effective when compared to a battery. And what happens in a hydrogen economy is that you take ordinary water, and you pass an electric current through that water, and it splits the water into hydrogen and oxygen, and you store the energy of the electricity in the hydrogen that's been separated. And it's the introduction of a hydrogen economy that starts making the economics of desalination now completely different, because you can have a desalination plant running, let's just say producing 100 units of water, and in that desalination plant running at steady state producing 100 units of water, you can say 20 units of that is now going to go to hydrogen production. So you sell the hydrogen energy from the 20 units of water that you've desalinated, but because the cost of the energy that you're selling is so high, it subsidizes the cost of desalination. So it ultimately starts making your desalination cost even lower. So these things are all viable in South Africa, and it's not inconceivable that we'll see a future where a place like Port Shepstone would start becoming a significant producer of hydrogen energy, but at the same time desalinating seawater to create economic growth and activity using mature technologies, because desalination technology is mature, but so too is this remix technology is becoming mature now. And of course, your hydrogen technology is also becoming very mature. So the convergence of these 3 mature technologies is going to change in the next almost few months to few years, that shorter time frame. It's going to fundamentally alter the economics of large-scale desalination in South Africa, and you're likely to start seeing these kind of plants rolled out across the entire South African seaboard, wherever water is an economic limiting factor in a local town or city. My name is Anthony Turton. I hope you found this information